Here at 100 Huntley Street, we've been tracking with upcoming expansions to medical assistance in dying, set to take effect across our nation this March 17th, 2024. These new expansions to M.A.I.D will allow people living with mental illness in our nation to access euthanasia and die by medically assisted suicide. Here to give us an update on where things stand is Julia Beazley, the Director of Public Policy at the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. Thank you for being with us today, Julia.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, Julia, right now in Ottawa, they are working on a special report connected to these developments of M.A.I.D in Canada. Where do things stand right now? What are the objectives of this special committee?
Sure. So that special joint committee of MPs and senators, in their second report, it called for that committee to be reconvened 5 months ahead of that take effect or coming into force date that you mentioned of March 17th. So they were brought back together. Their mandate was fairly narrow this time around, and it was to verify the degree of readiness or preparedness for a safe and adequate implementation of M.A.I.D for mental illness, and then to make recommendations back to the House and to the Senate. So essentially it was to assess whether Canada was ready to move ahead with M.A.I.D for mental illness. So they had, I think it was 3 days of meetings in November and December where they heard from medical associations, regulators, departmental officials, M.A.I.D providers and assessors, and then there was a number of individuals, psychiatrists and medical professionals. We've also heard that they received many written submissions from concerned individuals and organizations like the EFC.
That's very good. And Julia, we've been asking our 100 Huntley Street viewers to write into their MPs and to try to influence how this report is taking shape and influence ideas and decisions. How would you say the report is taking shape right now?
Well, that's hard to know. I think we got the sense from the kinds of questions that were being asked in the committee that there were several members who do have serious concerns about readiness, whether the medical system is ready, whether our medical professionals are adequately trained and equipped to deal with this. Some of them talked about the mental health crises in their constituencies and the real challenges that people are facing trying to get the help they need, and so the unease they felt about that. They raised critical questions like whether it is even possible to determine if a patient's mental illness is irremediable or irreversible, or how are medical professionals supposed to distinguish between suicidality, which is a common symptom of many mental illnesses, or a carefully considered request for M.A.I.D. Is that distinction even possible? And they certainly heard from psychiatrists who said there's no way we should be moving forward at this point and calling for an indefinite delay. At the same time, it was clear the committee is deeply divided. There are some members who seem very ideologically committed to this expansion. That has been consistent since the committee was first formed. But we're hoping that the majority of the committee will recommend another delay and that it'll be a significant one. And I think we're cautiously optimistic that that might happen. We, of course, don't want to see any further expansion of euthanasia in Canada. But if we are going to move ahead, there is just so much that needs to be addressed in terms of our mental health care system and access to care and all of these complex questions around mental illness itself.
Of course, Julia, there are so many concerns being raised right now about the expansion of M.A.I.D for those with mental illness because 1 in 5 Canadians struggle with a mental health issue or illness. And that could be anxiety, depression. It can also look like PTSD or anorexia, all different kinds of conditions. And there are not the safeguards in place, and many people can fall through the cracks. Who do you think will fall through the cracks if M.A.I.D is implemented for those with mental illness?
I think that scope is pretty wide. We know that already with the system we have, people living with disability or chronic illness who are also maybe experiencing poverty, housing insecurity, food insecurity, or who can't access the care and support they need. We know that group of people, many of them are already falling through the cracks, and that number will increase significantly. I just think that many people who deal with mental illness, especially severe mental illness, already face high rates of, poverty, challenges in finding and keeping housing, finding and keeping a job, and all those things. So I think there's a lot of people who will be vulnerable. The latest data we have on mental health in Canadians tells us that, these rates of all those things you mentioned are on the rise across age groups. They are particularly prevalent among young people and marginalized populations. So I think in some sense, we're all at risk, right? Because we know that mental illness is something that touches all of us in some way. So it's very concerning.
It is very concerning. Well, this joint parliamentary committee, the report coming out is on January 31st. That's a couple days from now. Yeah. What would happen after that? What would the federal government do with that report? What is that going to look like as it unfolds?
So, as per their mandate, they will make a recommendation as to whether that take effect date of March 17th should be delayed again or whether they should move ahead. It would be great if they would recommend additional safeguards specific to mental illness, but I don't think that's likely, partly because it wasn't in their mandate, and that whole safeguard conversation is very complicated anyway. But we're hoping they will recommend a delay. The government has said that they will consider the committee report as they're weighing their options about what to do with this date coming up.
Yes. And Julia, for those who want to take action from now until March 17th and possibly even beyond, what can people do? What can concerned Canadians do to stop M.A.I.D being accessible for those who have mental illness in Canada?
So I think what I hope people will take away from today is that while that March 17th date is looming ever larger, it's not too late. There is still time to engage, and it is still really important that we engage. So we would love if as many Canadians as possible would contact their MP and ask for two things. First, to ask their party leader to delay or call for a delay of M.A.I.D for mental illness, to support a bill if one is tabled to delay so that it can move quickly. We are, thinking that enough MPs hear from enough of their constituents. There might be a delay. There does seem to be some openness. And in some year-end interview before Christmas, the minister did finally give an indication that a delay might actually be one of the things on the table. So that was a bit encouraging. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to be an expert. It can be as simple as calling your MP's office and saying, I am really concerned about this. Please support a delay of M.A.I.D for mental illness. If you're shy, as some of us are, you can call after hours and just leave that simple message on their phone. You can send a letter or write an email. I find that personal stories can be particularly compelling. And as we said, statistically, we know that this is an issue that will affect all of us personally in some way. And of course, to pray.
Yes.
We need to be praying for our MPs. We need to be praying for the senators. It's hard to know if a bill is tabled, if it moves quickly through the House. The uncertain piece feels like the Senate, because there's some very strongly pro-M.A.I.D senators, and that is where that push for expansion on the basis of mental illness alone came from initially.
Yes.
So while they did support a delay last time, it feels a little more uncertain what might happen there. So we need to be praying for our senators too, and of course for all of our neighbors who are struggling with their mental health.
Well, Julia, thank you so much for this critical update. Of course, prayer is so important, and the Bible instructs us to pray for our nation, pray for our leaders, pray for our neighbors. Julia, thank you for being with us today and for all of this information.
It's my pleasure.
And can we encourage you at home to continue to pray? Pray for our nation, pray for our leaders, pray for your neighbors. Pray that M.A.I.D for those with mental illness is not available to Canadians across this nation. And of course, please contact your local MP. You can contact them between now and March 17th, 2024. You can continue to contact them after. Go to www.efc.ca/halt-M.A.I.D for more information and some support on how to contact your MP. And if you're struggling with mental illness and you need support right now, please call 988. That is our suicide crisis helpline across Canada, or call our 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week prayer line here at Crossroads, 1-866-273-4444. Our prayer partners are equipped to support you spiritually and practically on the road to good mental health. Stay with us.